The summer of 2023 hung heavy and humid over rural Kansas, a thick blanket of heat pressing down on the isolated farmhouse that had once belonged to Grandma Elsie. Lily, a perpetually bored 16-year-old, slumped against a dust-covered armchair. Her phone screen the only source of light in the dim, stale parlor. Her parents, Mom and Dad, were on a mission, a relentless whirlwind of cardboard boxes and frantic sorting, determined to clear out the house after Elsie's passing. Every creak of the old floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the loose window panes, seemed to carry a whispered memory, making the air feel strangely alive, yet undeniably melancholic. "Lily, could you please help with these old books?" Her mom's voice echoed from the study, laced with a familiar blend of exasperation and parental plea. Lily sighed, dragging herself upright, her flip-flops shuffling reluctantly across the worn Persian rug. The house, built sometime in the early 1900s, felt like a time capsule, each room a repository of forgotten eras, its walls absorbing decades of secrets and unspoken narratives. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of sunlight that dared to penetrate the grimy windows, creating an ethereal, almost ghostly atmosphere that Lily found both dreary and, secretly, a little unsettling. She wandered into the study, a small, cluttered room overflowing with yellowed paperbacks, ancient ledgers, and trinkets nobody remembered the purpose of. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and mildew, a smell so distinct to Elsie's house that it was almost a character in itself. Lily began to pull books from a teetering shelf, their spines brittle, their pages foxed with age. Each volume seemed to promise a forgotten tale, but her attention quickly waned, her mind drifting to the Wi-Fi signal she desperately wished would magically appear in this digital wasteland. Tucked away, behind a stack of tattered encyclopedias, almost as if deliberately hidden, her fingers brushed against something unexpectedly smooth and cool. A leather-bound book, unlike any other she had seen in the house. It wasn't a novel, nor a textbook. It felt solid, weighty, and surprisingly well-preserved compared to its crumbling companions. Intrigued, a spark of curiosity finally igniting within her, Lily pulled it free from its dusty alcove, carefully dislodging the various forgotten objects that surrounded it. The cover was unadorned, save for a faint, almost illegible title embossed in gold that had faded over time: Shadows. Its leather felt strangely supple beneath her fingertips, and a curious faint scent of something metallic and vaguely floral emanated from it, an aroma she couldn't quite place. She opened it carefully, the sound of the old binding creaking softly in the quiet room. Inside, it wasn't a book of words, but a scrapbook, filled to the brim with photographs. These weren't the typical family snapshots of Elsie's grinning relatives or childhood vacations. Instead, they were portraits of strangers, dozens of them, meticulously pasted onto thick, acid-free pages. The images spanned decades, perhaps even centuries, judging by the varying styles of dress and photographic techniques. There were solemn-faced Victorians, flapper-era revelers, stern-looking folks from the Great Depression, and even a few candid shots that looked distinctly modern, yet somehow out of place among the sepia-toned ghosts of the past. Each face stared, out from its faded frame, frozen in time, yet somehow unsettlingly vibrant. Lily noticed a recurring theme. Despite their diverse eras and appearances, a strange sense of unease seemed to emanate from many of them. Their eyes in particular held a peculiar glint, a spark of something unreadable that made Lily's skin prickle faintly. It was as if they were not just photographs, but windows into souls, each one carrying a silent, unspoken burden that lingered in the very fabric of the paper. She flipped through a few more pages, a knot forming in her stomach. "Hey Mom, Dad, look at this," she called out, holding the heavy book up. Her parents, emerging from a cloud of dust, briefly glanced at it. "Oh, probably some old local history stuff Elsie collected," her dad commented, waving a dismissive hand. She was always interested in the peculiar stories of this town. Her mom nodded, adding, "Just put it in that box with the other curiosities, honey. We need to finish up before dark." They didn't see it, or perhaps didn't want to. Lily, however, couldn't bring herself to place it in a box. There was something undeniably captivating about the scrapbook, a magnetic pull that kept her eyes glued to its contents. As she stared at a photo of a young woman in a 1920s dress, a peculiar sensation washed over her. Was it just the dim light? Or did the woman's smile, so fixed and unnerving, seem to stretch just a fraction wider, her eyes briefly glinting with an unnatural light? Lily blinked, her heart giving an odd lurch. No, it must have been her imagination, a trick of the flickering afternoon sun. But that night, as the farmhouse settled into its deep, echoing silence, and the Kansas wind howled like a mournful spirit outside, Lily couldn't sleep. The scrapbook lay on her bedside table, a silent, dark presence in the room. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and opened it to a random page. The same young woman in the 1920s dress stared back. This time there was no denying it. The smile was no longer fixed, but subtly contorted, a faint, almost imperceptible grimace twisting her lips. And her eyes were definitely staring directly at Lily, a cold, hungry gaze that seemed to pierce through the very paper into the depths of her soul. The next morning, the subtle unease had solidified into a chilling certainty for Lily. The faces in the scrapbook were undeniably changing. The young woman's smile had deepened into a grotesque sneer, her eyes now bulging slightly, their irises an unnatural, milky white. A man in an old-fashioned suit, who had initially appeared merely stern, now bore a gaping maw where his mouth should have been, a silent, horrifying scream frozen on the page. Lily's hands trembled as she clutched the book, a frantic urge to show her parents warring with the fear that they would dismiss her as sleep-deprived or overly imaginative. She found her mom in the kitchen, wiping down a dusty countertop. "Mom, you have to see this," Lily exclaimed, thrusting the scrapbook forward. Her mom, distracted, barely glanced at the open page. "Honey, it's just old photos. They probably faded or got discolored over time. These old houses can play tricks on your eyes in this light." She patted Lily's arm, her attention already drifting back to the task at hand. Dad, ever the pragmatist, offered similar assurances, suggesting Lily might be a bit stressed from the clean-out. Their dismissal, while understandable, only heightened Lily's isolation and growing terror. But the scrapbook wasn't just affecting her perception. It felt like it was subtly warping the very fabric of the old house. The shadows seemed to stretch, longer, deeper, clinging to corners and creeping up walls with an unusual sentience. Faint whispers, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, would occasionally brush past her ears, always just beyond the threshold of understanding, always too fleeting to confirm. The farmhouse, already ancient and creaky, now seemed to sigh, and groan with a different kind of weight, a new, heavy presence settling within its decaying bones. The figures in the photographs, once passive subjects, now seemed to possess a chilling awareness. When Lily moved the book, their eyes would appear to shift, following her, their expressions subtly adapting, reacting to her presence. It was a silent, unnerving surveillance, as if they were not just pictures, but dormant entities stirred too. Life by her discovery, slowly but surely awakening to a new, horrifying purpose. The air around the scrapbook grew colder, even in the stifling Kansas heat, a localized pocket of unnatural chill that clung to the pages. One particular photograph, nestled towards the back of the book, became a focal point of Lily's dread. It depicted an elderly woman with sharp, piercing eyes, initially appearing merely severe. Now her face was a canvas of pure malevolence, the skin taut and almost translucent, the eyes sunk deep into their sockets, radiating an intense, predatory hunger. This specific figure seemed to exert a strange pull on Lily, its gaze locking onto her whenever she inadvertently opened to that page. A silent promise of unspeakable horror held within its distorted features. Her parents, oblivious to the scrapbook's insidious influence, continued to rationalize the odd occurrences. A sudden gust of wind slamming a door shut was just the draft. A misplaced item was senior moments setting in early. The strange, almost mournful hum that sometimes vibrated. Through the floorboards was the old pipes. Their practical explanations, however, felt increasingly flimsy against the growing tide of Lily's visceral fear, leaving her feeling utterly alone in her terrifying observations. Sleep offered no respite. Her nights were plagued by vivid, horrifying nightmares. The distorted faces from the scrapbook would fill her dreams, their eyes burning into hers, their mouths opening in silent, guttural screams. She would wake in a cold sweat, the images lingering, their grotesque features imprinted on the backs of her eyelids. Sometimes she would swear she could hear the faint, echoing whispers of the scrapbook figures in her waking moments. A ghostly chorus just at the edge of audibility, slowly encroaching on her sanity. The feeling of being watched intensified, even when the scrapbook was closed and tucked away. She would catch glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, a shadowy figure darting behind a doorway, a distorted reflection in a dusty mirror, only for it to vanish when she turned her head directly. The silence of the farmhouse, once merely peaceful, now felt like a suffocating blanket, thick with unseen presences, each creak and groan a potential confirmation of her worst fears. Small, physical manifestations began to occur. A faint, cloying scent of decaying flowers would sometimes waft through the air, even though no flowers were present. Objects on shelves would subtly shift their positions, always just enough to be noticeable, but too little to be definitively attributed to anything other than the house's quirks. One afternoon, while Lily was alone in the parlor, a heavy, antique clock on the mantelpiece began to chime inexplicably, its ancient mechanism rattling with an eerie, off-key melody that sent shivers down her spine, the sound echoing eerily. Through the empty rooms, Lily became consumed by the scrapbook, a morbid fascination taking root alongside her terror. She would spend hours poring over its pages, meticulously examining each photograph, desperate to find a pattern, a clue, anything that could explain the horrifying transformation. She drew sketches of the changing faces, wrote notes about the timestamps of the shifts, and even tried to discern if certain figures were linked. It was an obsession born of fear, a desperate attempt to understand the evil that was slowly, inexorably spilling from the pages into her reality. The insidious creep of the scrapbook's influence escalated with terrifying speed, shattering the last vestiges of normalcy in the farmhouse. The ghostly whispers now coalesced into discernible, though still garbled, murmurs that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The cold spots intensified, manifesting as chilling drafts that swept through rooms, raising goosebumps on bare skin even on the warmest Kansas afternoons. Lily no longer merely sensed the presence of the figures. She saw them, fleeting glimpses of their distorted forms materializing in the periphery of her vision, their grotesque visages flickering into existence. Before dissolving back into shadow, she would be walking down the hallway and catch a glimpse of the Victorian woman with the stretched smile peering from behind a doorway, her eyes hollow before she blinked and the space was empty again. Or she would turn from the window to see the man with the screaming maw standing silently in the corner of her room, a transparent, shimmering outline against the dim light, only to disappear the moment her eyes fully focused. These spectral appearances became more frequent, more vivid, their unsettling clarity pushing Lily closer to the brink of a complete breakdown. Even her parents, once so dismissive, could no longer ignore the escalating strangeness. Her mom started complaining of inexplicable chills that left her shivering uncontrollably, even wrapped in blankets. Her dad, usually unflappable, became increasingly irritable and paranoid, frequently checking locks and muttering about this old place playing tricks. They would often exchange uneasy glances when a distant thud or a faint, unsettling sigh echoed through the house, though they still struggled to articulate their growing fear, each trying to find a logical explanation for the illogical. The farmhouse itself seemed to be subtly transforming, as if its very architecture was warping to accommodate the creeping horror. Familiar hallways appeared subtly longer, rooms felt oddly proportioned, and the old wallpaper seemed to ripple and shift, its patterns momentarily morphing into unsettling shapes, reflecting the grotesque distortions found within the scrapbook's pages. Lily swore that the shadows cast by the furniture sometimes coalesced into the faint outlines of the scrapbook figures, their silent forms merging with the familiar contours of the room. One afternoon, The horror became undeniable and physical. Lily was alone in the kitchen, making herself a sandwich when a sudden, Arctic blast of air swept through the room, chilling her to the bone. The lights flickered violently, and in the momentary darkness, the elderly woman with the malevolent eyes from the scrapbook stood directly in front of her, solid and terrifyingly real. Her skin was a translucent gray, her mouth a jagged, silent snarl, and her eyes, impossibly wide, burned with an ancient, malevolent fire. Lily screamed, dropping her plate, and the apparition vanished, leaving behind an unbearable, lingering coldness that seemed to seep into her very bones, and a faint, acrid smell like burning hair. The family began to suffer more acutely. Her mom developed a persistent, hacking cough that worsened at night, accompanied by restless, nightmare-filled sleep. Her dad, once robust, became pale and drawn, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a constant, nervous twitch and an obsession with barricading doors and windows, convinced someone or something was trying to get in. Lily herself felt a constant draining of her energy, a pervasive sense of dread that never lifted, and a growing paranoia that made her distrust every shadow, every creak. Desperate for answers, Lily spent her waking hours researching the farmhouse's history, hoping to uncover a hidden past that explained the scrapbook. She delved into dusty town archives, online forums about local legends, and old newspaper clippings. She unearthed fragmented tales of inexplicable disappearances, strange illnesses, and whispers of shadow people that predated even Elsie's ownership. Vague, chilling anecdotes that resonated deeply with the horrors unfolding around them. The property, she discovered, had a long, troubled history, frequently changing hands after short, often tragic occupancies. The line between the photographs and reality blurred further. Lily would sometimes find herself momentarily unable to distinguish between the still images in the scrapbook and the fleeting apparitions that haunted the house. The expressions on the faces within the pages would mirror the despair and terror she saw on her parents' faces. It was as if the scrapbook was a conduit, not just manifesting the figures, but slowly dragging the family into its own distorted, nightmarish dimension, making them part of its horrifying narrative. In a frantic attempt to break the cycle, Lily tried to get rid of the scrapbook. She tried to burn it in the old fireplace, but the flame seemed to recoil from its leather cover, leaving it completely untouched. She attempted to tear the pages, but they were impossibly tough, resisting all her efforts. Her dad even tried to bury it deep in the backyard, only for it to mysteriously reappear on the kitchen table hours later, its pages eerily open to the photograph of the old woman, her distorted face seeming to smirk in triumph. The book was tethered to them, an inescapable curse. The final, horrifying truth began to dawn upon them. The figures from the scrapbook were no longer mere apparitions or fleeting glimpses. They were clearly present, moving through the house with increasing solidity, their forms distinct, their movements deliberate. The farmhouse was no longer a home, but a terrifying stage, and the family, trapped within its walls, were the unwilling players in a macabre performance, their lives now irrevocably intertwined with the grotesque entities that had spilled from the pages of shadows their malevolent gazes now fixed upon their new prey. The farmhouse had become a living tomb, a labyrinth of fear where every shadow held a lurking horror and every silence was pregnant with unseen presences. The family, gaunt and terror-stricken, huddled together in the living room, the meager light of a single lamp pushing back weakly against the oppressive darkness that pulsed from every corner. The distorted faces from the scrapbook were no longer confined to the periphery. They were everywhere. Spectral figures drifting through doorways, leaning over banisters, their silent, mocking stares freezing the blood in their veins. The air was thick with their malevolent energy, a chilling weight that pressed down on their chests, making every breath a desperate struggle. The old woman from the scrapbook, her face a terrifying mask of ancient malevolence, was the undeniable leader of this spectral invasion. She manifested most frequently, her translucent form gliding through walls, her eyes burning like embers in the gloom. Lily felt her presence constantly, a cold, predatory gaze that seemed to follow her every move, even when the figure itself was not visible. The other entities, the man with the screaming maw, the subtly smiling flapper, and countless others, were her silent, grotesque retinue, moving in unison, herding the family deeper into their nightmarish trap. Dad, fueled by a primal instinct to protect his family, made a desperate attempt to break free. He charged the front door, slamming his shoulder against the reinforced wood, but it remained impervious, as if sealed by an invisible force. The windows, too, resisted all efforts, their glass unyielding, reflecting only the terrified faces of the family, and beyond them, the shadowy figures standing just outside, their distorted visages pressed against the panes, silently watching their futile struggle, their eyes glinting with a cold, triumphant light. Mom, tears streaming down. Her face whispered frantic prayers, clutching a small, wooden crucifix that seemed to offer no solace against the overwhelming dread. She spoke of escaping, of fighting, but her words were hollow, devoid of conviction, lost in the echoing silence of the house. Lily, numb with terror, felt a strange detachment, her mind struggling to process the impossible reality unfolding around her. The world had inverted. The safety of her home had become the source of her deepest fear, and the line between sanity and madness blurred with every passing second. The primary figure, the old woman, finally solidified in the center of the living room, her form becoming almost corporeal, her eyes fixed on Lily. A low, guttural growl, ancient and full of malice, emanated from her, reverberating through the very foundations of the house. Lily felt an unbearable pressure in her head, as if something was trying to force its way into her mind, to merge with her consciousness. The other spectral figures closed in, their distorted faces pressing closer, their silent screams amplifying the terrifying atmosphere. Just as the old woman's skeletal hand began to reach for Lily, a sudden blinding flash of light erupted. From the scrapbook, which lay open on the dusty coffee table, the pages fluttered wildly, as if caught in an unseen gale, and the distorted faces within them began to swirl, their features blurring and reforming with impossible speed. The light pulsed, growing brighter, encompassing the entire room temporarily, disorienting the spectral figures, causing them to recoil with faint, pained moans. As the light subsided, the terrifying figures were gone. The oppressive chill lifted, replaced by the humid summer air, and the farmhouse settled back into its familiar creaks and groans. Mom and Dad, trembling but unharmed, stared around the room in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief and profound relief. The scrapbook lay quietly on the table, its pages now still, the photographs within appearing normal once more, their subjects frozen in their original, innocuous poses, as if the horrifying ordeal had been nothing but a collective hallucination. Lily, however, felt a strange, chilling sensation spreading through her, a profound sense of wrongness that transcended the relief. Her gaze fell upon the scrapbook, drawn to it by an invisible force. She approached it slowly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. On the very last page, a page she swore had been empty just moments before, a new photograph had appeared. It was a picture of a family, huddled together in a dimly lit living room, their faces etched with terror. And then she saw it, a detail that stole her breath and froze her blood. The teenage girl in the photograph, her face contorted in a silent scream of pure horror, was undeniably her. Her parents were there too, their faces twisted into grotesque caricatures of despair, their eyes wide with a familiar bone-chilling fear. Their features, though recognizably theirs, were subtly elongated, their eyes too wide, their mouths slightly agape, already beginning the insidious distortion that marked the other figures in the book. The title, Shadows, now seemed to glow faintly, mockingly, from the cover. The twist was not that the spirits had left, but that they had found new hosts. The scrapbook wasn't merely a gateway for entities to manifest out. It was a horrifying trap, slowly pulling new victims in. Elsie hadn't just collected old photos. She had curated a living gallery of trapped souls, and in her death, a new vacancy had opened. The family hadn't just cleaned out the house. They had become its newest permanent residence, destined to slowly warp and distort their captured, screaming faces forever immortalized within the insidious pages of the Scrapbook of Shadows.